the voice of the job seekers. This is Mark Anthony Dyson, your host, as always, trying to bring you the best information as possible to help your brand in your career. You know, the employers are waiting to hear from you. And jumping right into this conversation with Melissa Cooley, and you guys have been listening, you know Melissa from a couple of episodes on interviews, which still remain the most downloaded you know, uh, interviews and conversations that I've had, of the many that I've had. So, welcome back, Melissa Cooley, the jobquest.com, also co-author of Nourish Your Career, and she doesn't brag about this very much. She's also a top career Twitter pro by the Muse. I believe that's right. Isn't that right, Melissa?
There's a few that have put me on their top the top job experts, and I put that in quotes to follow.
Yeah,
But
well,
I mean,
yeah.
I'm just glad that the content that I share is helpful. And I did want to quick correct you. My website is actually melissacooley.com, not thejobquest.com.
Yes,
Okay,
my bad.
so that's
You're
okay.
right. You're right. Well, when you go to a blog, the first thing you see is the job quest. And
Right.
I have it marked as a favorite for the past 3 or 4 years. So, I'm so used to, seeing that and then knowing you know how it works.
Yes, I do.
Anyhow, anyway, we enjoy talking about interviews with Melissa. She is an interview coach and a certified resume writer. So I want to have this discussion about what not to say in interviews, which is pretty straightforward. I think what we want to do is kind of set a little bit of context because Melissa and I have discussed this as far as, whether, we're not saying that we're banning any specific set of words within the words that itself. It's not like your resume that somebody's scanning, but there are going to be some clues where you might turn the interviewer off. So I just want to be sure we set the context as what not to say is to avoid the words. Of course, they all should have context and they should all have a function, but there's some things that phrases and speech that you should not use in the least bit. Did I forget anything, Melissa?
Well, and I actually kind of wanted to hit on something that you talked about, which is in terms of the context. And I think that's something to keep in mind. Depending upon where you're at in the interview process, you could be talking with an HR generalist who has to talk with everybody who interviews everyone in the company, from the accountant to the supervisors to someone in engineering. So they're interviewing a lot of people, and while they are experts at interviewing people and determining whether this is a quality candidate, they may not be experts in the particular field and the particular job that you do. So like I said, in terms of the context, if you're talking to an HR generalist, throwing out a lot of acronyms that are commonly used within the job that you do might make it kind of difficult for the interviewer to follow along with you because they aren't specialists in what you do. And so, in that case, you would not use as many of the acronyms and maybe say out the phrase instead of just using that, versus say if you're interviewing with the hiring manager, someone who would be very well versed in what you're doing, using the acronyms would actually show that you are an insider in this field and that you actually know what you're talking about, and it actually builds your credibility as a candidate.
Yes, and we see this very often on resumes that, especially federal resumes, lots of acronyms, which, even if you're in the military and you interview lots of people, you're not going to memorize many of those acronyms. So really, in the initial interview, nobody's not going to care about how many letters you have behind your name. I think it's going more when you get to the second tier
Right.
of people that you're going to see, and especially people who are more familiar. So that goes to say that you should also be familiar with each person you interview's role, so you can target your spiel to to that person.
Precisely. I mean, it's about knowing your audience and how to best present yourself to your audience that they would be able to, fully recognize the value that you have. And, it's a matter of not confusing certain audiences with acronyms, or being able to fully display your knowledge base with
Hmm.
others.
Yes. So here we're going to just try to go through some of the no-nos, or well, yeah, I think these are pretty distinct. Uh, we're going to make some of them obvious, but I think people have done this and been guilty of it. And I've been on the other end where I've interviewed, and actually, people will use, like the first one, would use a coarse joke to think that they're breaking the ice, when indeed that they have kind of disqualified themselves as a serious candidate.
Right. Excuse me. Any kind of rude language is not really going to work out well. And I mean, just telling jokes when you're making first impressions isn't always the best way to go about it, because you don't really know how that person is going to be taking it. And the other thing to remember is, this is an interview. Even if you walk into the interview and you have an immediate rapport with with the interviewer, that doesn't mean that that person's your best friend. And you don't
Right.
treat it can be easy for candidates to slip into a more comfortable role or a feeling with it all, and then end up saying something that they shouldn't, because they really are in an interview and this is a professional situation.
Yes, and I think people can get a little too comfortable. Most people are nervous, but in the nervousness, your true self often comes out, and you know, you got to kind of show restraints on both sides. You don't want to be too inward focused,
Hmm.
and you don't want to be too, people pleasing or doing something that's going to throw the interviewer off.
Right. I
So,
I would agree.
go ahead. Yeah.
Yeah.
So, to go along with the coarse joking, I think even cursing is a no-no.
Well, right. Any
And
any kind of rude language, I mean, you don't know who the person is, and regardless of, even if in that person's personal life they may tell rude, coarse jokes, or they may, uh, you know, use more colorful language. This is not the time or place for it, and you're not going to impress an interviewer with the extent of your vocabulary of four-letter words. It's just you need to focus on what you can do to add value to the company, and how you can excel in the position and be able to hit things off from the get-go.
yes, and we understand that there's a culture that would be acceptable of some of the words that would be considered cursing,
Yeah,
and
but
I
the interview
but
is not the place to bring it.
right,
Interview is not
I
the interview is not the place to be bringing this, though. I mean, you are making first impressions, and the first impression you need to give is that you are professional and that you are the top candidate for the job. And I mean, to me, that really, cursing and that has no place in an interview, and is actually a disqualifier.
Yes, I completely agree. And Um, the companies I've interviewed people for, that was an automatic turnoff. That was,
Yeah.
you know, that just did not fly on any kind of level because you're going to be talking, you know, in my case, it was either you were talking to doctors or you were talking to attorneys. And they're the ones that pay the bills. And you just never know who is going to be offended by what.
Right.
So that's definitely no. And speaking of no, here's something a little controversial: is saying no during an interview. And there are different thoughts on that. I have I have an opinion, and I'll share mine first, and then I'll let you go ahead and share yours. And the way I've coached people is no should have a context. Uh, there are some things that are absolutely not and should be stated as such. If you asked if you smoked, it said no, I don't practice it. I think that's a light no. But if it's something that you're resistant towards, then I think that deserves a different type of answer. In other words, say no without saying no. How about yourself, Melissa? What are your thoughts on
Well,
that
you
and
know,
how
I
you
mean,
anticipate that?
and I definitely appreciate what you're saying. You don't want, I mean, if this is a job that you definitely want and um, you've done your research on the company and you know this is a place that you would enjoy working at, definitely you want to make sure that you present yourself as a candidate who, while you don't have all the answers and may
Mm-hmm.
not have done everything that's part of the job description, that you are very willing to learn and that you have maybe say cursory experience that could be applicable, you know, to developing a skill set that could help you be successful with this. But,
Mm-hmm.
you know, really though, you would have to see what it is that they want you to do. If it's something that you're uncomfortable doing or something that you really don't want to do and that wasn't fully spelled out in, say, the job posting,
Mm-hmm.
maybe you need to think about, is this a job that I really want to have? To just make yourself to be contorted into some rubber figure that fits into their mold isn't necessarily going to help you 6 months down the line when you're doing something that you just would, you know, rather be, you know, stabbing your eyeballs out or something. You know, it's just
Right.
if it's a part of the job that is really not something that fits with your personality or it just that you don't like doing, to do whatever it takes to get the job and then on down the line you end up really hating what you're doing, it doesn't help you because then you're stuck in a situation where you feel like that you need to get another job because you don't like what you do.
Yeah, and that is a tough one because you know, what if I mean, I think saying no within itself is not particularly wrong,
No.
especially when it's an absolute and that there's good reasoning behind it. And I think it is, yeah, we could say is geared more towards no or yes or no, will you be willing to do X, Y, and Z? Of course, there's always a way to get around that, but of course that takes practice. That takes taking time and being prepared. If you're well prepared, you're able to use other verbiage that would be much more positive without being no, because people that stands out. That two-letter word stands out in any conversation, and you do have to be careful, but you also have to be prepared. As you said, the research is going to be a catalyst for how well you do.
Right. And excuse me, being prepared is a huge part of the interview. You can't just expect to walk in there and that everything that is perfect is going to come rolling off your tongues. More often than not, it won't because you are nervous and there may be questions that had you prepared in the general the ballpark of that question, you would be
Hmm.
able to answer a bit more eloquently and that kind of thing. And so, well, and the other thing about saying no, and it not necessarily being a bad thing, is it shows that you have original thought, and part of the reason why some companies would be hiring a candidate from outside, um, especially if that's what you're going for, is going to a new company, they see it as a way that they can grow and that they can build their institutional knowledge, and that they can, maybe get different perspectives on a particular issue that they may be having. So having someone who is not going to just go along with the groupthink it can be seen as a positive thing. It really all depends upon who the hiring manager is, what the general culture of the company is, and that sort of thing.
Oh yeah, and I would go on, but I'm gonna bookmark that point because I think that's something that's pretty vital to another discussion. And I think actually we can spend another 20 minutes just talking about that aspect alone. So I'm going to choose to kind of move on because there are a couple other points I want to cover under this particular conversation. Um, Using words that you don't know the meaning of is something that was really big for me coming up. And I think the reason is that people try so hard to impress and people please and
Right.
think they know what you may like, when in actuality it kind of becomes a distraction and to some degree become a disqualifying uh, part of your interview when you start using phrases and words that you don't know. It may not be particularly big word, but sometimes, especially if you're in a room in a panel discussion, you'll get several looks that will, you know, should give you a clue. Oh, did I say something wrong? So, that's a big one for me that I've seen firsthand.
Well, and even in excuse me, resumes and cover letters,
Yes.
people think about using the $5 million word to, to
Hmm.
to show, oh, I'm so knowledgeable with my vocabulary and that. And sometimes, simple is better. Just
Yes.
instead of trying to use language to impress, use language to convey your message. And how are you best going to be conveying a story about your career or a message about your personal brand? It's by
Hmm.
speaking as clearly and plainly as possible. There's nothing wrong with using plain language.
Yes, and I think what it is that people will look at some resumes and somebody that does is very comfortable in using, the $5 million words, um, and they'll think, oh, I can use this to really impress someone. Really isn't impressive unless you naturally use those words and that particular field.
Right.
Um,
Well, and that's a good point too. I mean, when you're talking in an interview, um, you want it to represent who you are, and how your personality and how you talk every day and that kind of thing. I mean, of course, language notwithstanding, which we already
right,
covered, but
right.
I mean, if you don't normally use that kind of language, it's going to come across very stilted, and like you were saying before, you may misuse it, and that will actually hurt you more than help
Yeah.
you. And so, to be staying more true to who you are will serve you better in the long run, because ultimately they are hiring you, not a contorted version of you.
Yes. Yes. Completely agree. That you want to give the true impression of who you are, not who you want you, not who they think that they're getting, because people can see right through it. That's all there is. Next one is slang. Slang is something that, or people, if you want to use a $5 million word, how about colloquialisms? And I don't know if I've even said that right, but that word just popped in my head. But ultimately, slang of any kind, you have to stay away from.
Well, I mean, to some degree, we all use a little bit of slang in our conversation. You know, the how we refer to things here in America is different, say, than how people using you know English in England would. You know what I mean? And
Yes.
that right there, you know what I mean? And
Yes. Yeah.
that kind of thing. And so, I mean, there's going to be a little bit of it, but again, it's about staying professional. You're not getting so relaxed, like it's situation. You don't want to feel like you're talking to your good friend over drinks or whatever. This is
Hmm.
an interview, and staying professional and being focused on conveying your value is the primary goal here.
Yeah. And I think too, there's times when slang crosses some societal and cultural um, barriers that really what you may think means one thing, but you don't want to give the person that's listening to you a chance to misinterpret what your intent is. And to
Right.
me, that's why slang, you have to unless you understand that person to know exactly what you're talking about, you have to be very careful in the way that you deliver those particular words, because words are still they mean something in an interview, and in fact, to a great degree, in that particular context, they mean everything.
Right.
So
That,
slang, tread very lightly. Did you want to add anything else to that?
no, but again, like I said, it's about being professional and being regarded as professional, regardless of who your audience is. And you don't want them to think about you as being, even if the cultural issues notwithstanding, even if they were to completely understand what you're saying, you still want it to be that they see you as a professional in the job, being able to interact with a variety of people, from a variety of cultures, and not have it be, oh, this person might be limited if they can only comfortably function within this cultural group.
Yes, yes, completely agree. Completely agree. That's all we're going to have time for. I had a couple of others, but we're going to halt it right here. So, Melissa, thank you very much for coming on once again, the Voice of Job Seekers. Of course, the YouTube video is going to be available right away, and for people to kind of, have some food for thought. Uh, there is a cliche there. Uh, how can people engage in a conversation with you or get a hold of you or contact you for any
Okay.
reason?
Well, my website is melissacooley.com. That's melissacooley.com. And they can, if they want to talk to me more about working together, partnering for their success, there's a contact page on my website, and I'd be
Mhm.
glad to talk to them.
Awesome, awesome. Thank you, Mel. That's been awesome.
Thanks for having me, Mark.